You're listening to Dots, Lines, and Destinations, a travel podcast with hosts Stephen Seagraves, Fosma Moon, and Seth Miller. Hello, and welcome to episode 337 of Dots, Lines, and Destinations. I'm Stephen Seagraves, joined today by Seth Miller and Fosma Moon. Hey, guys.
Hello.
How you doing?
Yeah, we're all back together after Seth's non-camping trip.
I was mostly camping.
Glamping.
There was nothing glamp about it. That I assure you. 2 of the 3 nights were spent in a tent. The third night, after not sleeping for 2 of the 3 nights, or not sleeping very well, and with rain in the forecast, we booked a hotel room not far away and did, in fact, switch to the hotel. My thing about camping is, especially if you're just going to sleep in a tent, which is fine, and I will do it under the circumstances where it's the way to get to things, that's the only way to really do it, like kayaking the fjords of Norway or whitewater rafting in Alaska when you're out in the bush or something like that. Mm-hmm. But if there is a plethora of mid-range hotels 15 minutes away, I'm going to say you probably didn't need to be in a tent for that. And some people may prefer the tent thing. I'm of a certain age and obnoxiousness. That's not me.
Yeah. You're at the point in your life where you're comfortable staying in the.
I am more comfortable in a bed than in a tent. I have learned that about myself. This was a very educational weekend.
It was a growing moment for you.
S'mores, on the other hand, much easier to do at a campsite.
You don't burn your hotel down. Yeah, it's good.
Turns out, could you do s'mores? Annie, have you seen the videos of people cooking on an iron flipped upside down?
Yes.
You think you could do s'mores that way?
Yeah,
without
probably
destroying the place?
I mean,
you could try to find a hotel with a fireplace.
With a fire pit or a fireplace, yeah. But in a bizarre, aside, which is basically all I'm useful for anyways, the Residence Inn in Gainesville, Florida, where I grew up, where it was right around the corner from our house, and when you checked in, they used to give you firewood because they had wood-burning fireplaces.
Huh. That's
in North Florida, so it was useful for 3 of the 365 days of the year.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's pretty common here. They either they'll tell you to bring firewood or
to a hotel.
Firewood. Yeah, some of the hotels, especially along the coast.
Okay.
So,
but those are are those chain, normal, modern build?
No.
You're talking about almost motel, someone who owns 6 rooms and a strip along the waterfront kind of thing.
Yeah.
That makes more sense to me. I'm talking about, this was a Residence Inn that invited people to start fires inside. Admittedly only in the fireplace, but still, and in a part of the world that really fireplaces were completely overrated or unnecessary. They were lovely. We, as kids used to love to make fires, but my dad hated it because it's there's all this work and it gets things dirty and it's really not cold out. What are we doing here? So anyway.
Oh man. So we got some interesting topics this week. I think it's been talked to. I mean, you were a guest on another show and talked about this, so you can talk about it on our show now. Boom.
Yes.
It's just let's just talk about it. United made an announcement that they've signed an agreement for a certain number of planes, and what
it's
what are
not
your
a firm
thoughts?
order.
Not a firm order. Yeah,
it's an order for 15 with 35 options, but it's not a firm order. Some spectacular publicity at play.
I would say that's an understatement. Everyone I know, I got tons of people asking me about it within a day or two of them making that announcement.
Yeah. Yeah, my wife was like, "Oh, you're gonna fly supersonic," and I'm like, "Yeah, it's never gonna happen." It's I mean, let's they really tout Tokyo to San Francisco, right, and London and New York. Tokyo to San Francisco,
the plane doesn't have the range.
Doesn't have the range to do it,
so it has to stop in Anchorage.
Yep. London to New York is fast,
mm-hmm.
but you can only be supersonic for half the flight, I guess.
So there's some interesting data on this. John Ostrower of the Air Current and, just being John Ostrower, had found an old Concorde flight plan and actually pulled some of the numbers together on it. So one of the interesting things among the many things that came out of this announcement is Boom is now anticipating it flying at Mach 1.7, not Mach 2.2, which was the original plan, and Concorde flew at Mach 2.0. So it'll actually be slower than Concorde, although still a very, a larger plane with more seats and, in theory, although United, who the hell knows if this happened, how many seats they would try to put on it, and would it be beds or not, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the travel time was I want to say on Concorde was, you got supersonic, something 13 minutes out of JFK. It was pretty quick. because the departure, instead of taking a slightly more northerly route that took you over land, you stayed out over water and could just climb to like 58,000 feet or whatever it was and go straight to supersonic. So it got up there
south of Long Island, basically.
Yeah, it would go out south of there and then sort of straight across, and still arced whatever with the tailwinds and whatnot. But like it stayed further south and did not cut across Massachusetts or that bumpy spot over Halifax or any of those other bits. So, okay, fine. But it was 2 hours and 21 minutes, I want to say, or 2 hours and 40 minutes is one of the two, to the Irish coast. And that's where it would have to switch to subsonic because you couldn't sonic boom over land. And then it would queue up and get in. And it was on like I want to say 3 hour and 30 minute flight. So like the last hour was subsonic. What's really interesting about that is it's only about a 7-minute difference at Mach 1.7. Instead of 2.0, so it's not that much slower, really. But if you start looking at like what are the other destinations going to be other than London, and like try to go to Frankfurt or try to go to Paris or try to go to Madrid or any of those others, Madrid actually might work a little better because you can stay off the coast a little longer. But like to get to Paris, to get to Frankfurt, all those you have to sort of drop to subsonic around the same time. You can go a little south and go and stay off the shore of Ireland and sort of cut in across France. But you spend a lot of the trip subsonic. And it's like, I want to say if you switch to subsonic at the Irish coast, like the London flight would, I actually tracked an A330 that Lufthansa was flying. And from there to Frankfurt was an hour 35 or an hour 45 in the air. Like that's a long time of extra. Then it really is more than half the flight more than half becomes subsonic. And it saves you some time. But between that and time zones, like if you left JFK at 9 a.m., that's 3 p.m. in Frankfurt, and it takes a 4.5 hour flight. You don't land until 7:30, so you can't get there for a dinner meeting. You can get home for dinner. It's a late dinner, or you can get home same day, but you can't get home for dinner. You can't get there for a meeting. So like that was always the value proposition. And coming back the other direction, again, it sort of works, but the eastbound transatlantics were really hard to sell. Even in the era of Concorde, the value of the eastbound transatlantic was always the tough proposition.
So, I mean, couldn't you, if you wanted to go to Frankfurt, just stay further south and not cross overland until France?
Until France, but you still spend an hour plus flying over France.
Is it that far?
Yeah, I think so.
I believe you. I'm just surprised.
I didn't. It's harder to fully map out because I couldn't get all the details. But
even if you stayed over, because I doubt they would let you say supersonic like over the English Channel because there's like
too close to. You're just too close to all the other things.
So I think it's about the same, honestly. Maybe a little bit shorter.
So anyway, there's some interesting things about it. I mean, the marketing behind it. The other thing is, and you alluded to, I talked about this on the Flight Radar podcast a couple weeks ago in the context of Aerion going out of business, which is Aerion was a business jet supersonic developer, and they'd been around for a long time and had been trying to get their business jet off the ground. And like 3 days before they abruptly announced that they no longer had any money and were shutting down, they were out hyping up a new design and faster speeds and bigger plane that was going to be commercial and all these other things, trying to generate cash flow. And on the Flight Radar podcast, I think I said something like of, I'm not trying to, how much of what Boom is doing right now, because their CEO had been talking about this and CNN was willing to publish it, CNN.com. His like, well, soon enough you'll be able to fly anywhere in the world for 4 hours for $100. And of course that's a sexy tagline, but like it's hard to believe that there's any truth to that. And if it happened, the environmental impact would be absurd.
Where did he get $100 from?
Because he likes sound bites that get him the publicity.
Okay.
But my comment to that was, God, it sounds like he's desperate for publicity and money because he's trying to raise funds similar to Aerion. And then they come out with this United deal where United has supposedly transferred some cash over, but it's in escrow or something. So if the planes don't get delivered, United gets its money back. At that point, I guess Boom gets some of the interest maybe, but even that's hard to tell. And in the interim, all they really got was the publicity. And yes, United showing up with the publicity. It's the same as the Archer deal with the eVTOLs, the flying whatever electric taxi things. It's great publicity for the other company, and United gets this sort of visionary or whatever designation because they're talking about these crazy new ideas. I mean, the supersonic stuff is terribly fuel inefficient, so calling it carbon net neutral is bullshit. I don't know how many times I'm allowed to say that before we lose our rating. I'm sorry, but maybe I should stop talking about this topic.
So let's go back to Seth's to Faz's point, right? Like he was saying it's a great publicity stunt,
right?
And is that all it is? I mean, it's kind of a publicity stunt for both United and for Boom. right? Like United gets some more screen time.
And their comms team did a spectacular job packaging this, I got to say. Like, seriously, kudos to them. They really, and I get the story they're trying to tell. I think they did a very good job telling it. I don't think it's 100% the truth, but I think they really deserve kudos for the way they got it out to the variety of media outlets they did.
I heard about it I was on a flight on Sunday, and one of the flight attendants was talking about it with another person.
How excited they were that all of these flights are going to be operated by Mesa because they only have 50 seats.
that right there is funny.
Or because how all their layovers in Europe are going to go away because it's 3 hours out each way, and so they no longer they can do it as a turn instead of an overnight.
Yeah, that's not what they were talking about, but yeah.
Neither of those things is actually true. Let's be very clear. But
yeah. So, Foz, what were you going to say?
I want to know where United is getting all this money to put into escrow after a year of losing so much money.
How much money do you think they really put out?
I don't know. Even if it's $1 million, with how much money they have spent or not made over the last year and how negative they've been, is this a good use of money?
Yes. I think I honestly, from United's perspective, I think it is a great use of money because of the marketing value. The amount of for putting that money aside, and especially knowing that they can get it back later, the cost there is so low for the amount of goodwill and the sort of publicity that they've earned out of it. I think it was smart money spent. Where are they getting it from? Yes, they have lost a lot of money in the past 18 months or whatever, but I have to assume that they're very close in line with the other airlines to the point that they're not actually hemorrhaging cash anymore, or very close to not hemorrhaging cash. We'll find out when, their next quarterly or whatever update comes out. But I think even American said it made money in May if you back out all the PPP money and whatever. So, or account for that. So,
but I would argue that United has a much bigger dependence on international premium traffic than American and Delta.
Yeah, but also did a much better job of pivoting that to cargo, which isn't the same, but they have picked up some additional revenue that the others didn't.
Absolutely.
So I just, at the end of it all, like, this is, you cut the marketing budget by 80% and you leave 1% of it for this and call this the marketing budget. And I think it's money smart spend. If you think of it from that perspective, that's all.
So do you guys want to give like a percentage chance that this ever happens?
Well, there's no engine.
So are you saying 0%?
When are these supposed to fly by?
2025 for rollout, 2026 for first flight, and then 2029 commercial deliveries, I think is the new timeline. That's the thing. So, like, Boom has a history of putting timelines out and then missing them. And so I think some healthy skepticism is justified in terms of sort of how they perform. They are still waiting. They have their test aircraft, the XB-1, which is supposed to validate some of the technology, and it might fly late this year or early next after a quote-unquote rollout last October, where they did a big, beautifully orchestrated video work unveiling, and then and it was sort of like when Boeing did their 787 unveiling because they wanted to hit a date and then didn't do anything with it for 3 years.
So I wonder how quickly they can get some old Rolls-Royce Snecma engines.
They're talking about no afterburner, and trying to use an existing core and then adjusting the bypass ratios to make it be able to support supersonic. And one of the reasons they slowed it down from Mach 2.2 to Mach 1.7 is, I think, as I understand, it was regulatory that for subsonic noise performance reasons, it had to be a smaller fan diameter. And so that limits the max speed because of the air intake. So, I mean,
so smaller diameter, faster rotation, most likely, possibly higher compression. This sounds like a disaster waiting to happen from an engine perspective.
Because of more cycles, more
stress on all those little components on the inside that have had a history of cracking and manufacturing issues of late. Is that what you're getting at, Foz?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we've talked about
the HPT components or whatever.
Yeah, we've talked about how we might be hitting the walls of physics at this point with the current generation of engines. Asking for much more might be too much.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think we're.
I'm very skeptical, obviously.
Yeah. I'm with you guys. Like, what do you think then? Are the odds? Let's give them an odd so we can, in 5 years look at this and go, we were wrong, or we were really right.
I did a segment on BBC World the other day, and we talked about all the skepticism, and at the end, presenters but will you buy a ticket? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. I'll do it once if I can. I want to fly supersonic. I think that would be cool. It's absolutely not worth the premium to me. I'm not sure anyone's really looked at, is there a business, even if all the timings and everything worked, like, are people going to pay 30 to 50% more for this benefit?
Yeah.
Historically, the answer was no. So, or not enough people on enough routes to justify broad production of the planes, right? Like, there were 20 Concords ever made, ish.
67 engines were made.
Okay.
The engine turns 55 this year.
You know, as long as you don't throw some aluminum shrapnel into it, it's probably fine.
I would argue pretty much any engine might have some problem.
Tungsten? It was some weird metal, right?
It was tungsten.
Yeah.
Or tungsten or titanium. It wasn't aluminum.
Yeah.
Aluminum was just broken.
Yeah. Shredded and melted.
Anyway. So, I mean, basically we're saying we don't think this is actually going to happen. Is that what we're saying?
I am very, very skeptical. I think there's way too many parts of this. And, oh, by the way, they still need to raise like $6 to $10 billion to build the damn thing. Thus far, they've raised about $300 million, 250, something like that.
When you count United's escrow money, another couple million,
maybe
making a dent.
No, this is all about, like, between this quote unquote order and the XB1. If they can get the XB1 in the air and have it fly, which I assume it will, like, there's no reason it can't work. The part where it's different engines and different shape and different almost everything else. I mean, some of the assembly technology and, like, composites are the same, I guess, but, like, I still haven't figured out what they're actually testing with this. Right, once they get it in the air, that will be another boost to the funding potential, but they still need like $6 to $10 billion. They're going to sell these planes at 120 million each, maybe 150 million each, and they expect to get, you know, list price, no discounts. So, haha, that's cute. But, like, how many of them do you have to sell to convince someone to justify investing $6 billion?
Mm-hmm.
Right? What's the break even there? And it's, you know, if I'm doing the math in my head, right, 150 million each times 4 would be 600 million. So 40 would be 6 billion in revenue. So 40 is, if the plane came in on time and on budget, 40 might be the break even number. And the reality is it's way higher than that, right? So it's not 400 probably, but it's not 40.
Yeah, because you still have to factor in maintenance facilities, parts depots, right? Because they have to be able to service these things as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, and the fact that it's going to be much more expensive than that, I would bet. So, like, and it's probably unlikely that they'll get list price for them, based on comments made by people like United saying, yeah, we got ourselves in at a good price point kind of thing. So they're going to have to sell a couple hundred of them to sort of, or have an order book that looks like a couple hundred to convince people to start dropping cash for the investment. And if that's your play, like, what are the routes that a couple hundred of these are going to fly on the regular, especially considering that overland supersonic seems very, very unlikely to come back or to happen.
Every 45 minutes out of JFK on BA.
Every 30 minutes out of Newark on United.
You know, great commuter. And that works for the, you know, from 6 a.m. to 2. Okay, so that's 8 each. Now what? I'll give you that. That's 16. Where's the rest going to go? Like,
a 3 a.m. departure so you can go clubbing and then head for London.
There you go. 3 a.m. would be 8 and land for lunch. I'm trying to do the math. Right, it's doing the math on when do you land and what, like, who would ever use that. The better example would be the 3 a.m. departure out of London after a night out clubbing, and you get home in time to sleep in your own bed.
I like that.
Or to pick up last call in Manhattan, but
could work both ways.
Yeah, or neither. I think is what we've come to.
I mean, of course, you'd have Delta probably wanting to do it as well out of JFK. So
sure, and United would put one out of Dulles, and, you know, would you do one out of Chicago, or do you spend too much extra time supersonic or subsonic there? Right, like,
it goes over Canada. Who cares?
Right? Would someone change the rule and say that you're allowed to go supersonic if you get far enough north and, like, screw the Inuits? I don't know, but. We're laughing. Some of these are legitimate questions. Like, would you be allowed to fly supersonic over northern Siberia or polar? Would you be allowed to fly supersonic over parts of the Middle East that are very underpopulated? Like,
yeah.
Could some of those routes start to develop, or random bits of Africa? Who knows? Like, I think, well, if you looked at the route map that Boom has proposed of, like, the 500 city pairs that could support supersonic service, it's highly optimistic, I will say.
Well, and to be clear, right, like, supersonic flight is allowed over land, right? There's military operating areas that have supersonic flight frequently, and they're in populated areas. So it's not unheard of. It's not overpopulated areas, but near.
Yeah, but commercial is not.
No.
And I mean, like, I still have vivid memories of being out on a golf course in South Florida on the West Coast and hearing a shuttle landing. We heard the boom as the shuttle passed across, headed into Cape Canaveral. It scared the shit out of us. I'd rather, like, if I knew it's coming, I guess it would be better, but, like, would rather not have that happen on a frequent basis.
every 30 minutes. Boom, boom, boom.
That would be less than desirable.
You can set your watch by it.
Especially for that 3 a.m. flight.
At the time of the boom, at the sound of the boom, the time will be 3 a.m.
Exactly. All right, we've killed this topic. Delta is code sharing with Air Baltic. What?
And hey, if you want to get to Riga or Vilnius or what's the third one?
Tallinn.
Yeah, that's your play. They've got, I think Riga's got the most service because that's what Air Baltic resumed. But like 16 airports to Riga, all over Europe. Which what I sort of don't understand about it is like, is anyone really flying Delta to Munich and then connecting to Riga? Like, how is that a useful code share to them?
Well, how would you get to Riga otherwise?
I haven't checked, but I would like to assume that through KLM or Air France, or I guess it would just be those two at this point.
I mean, maybe.
And by the way, Charles de Gaulle and Amsterdam are two of the code share points.
What about Alitalia?
Yeah, I started to say that and then stopped myself.
maybe we have this wrong. Maybe it's not about the routes and it's really wanting to learn their de-icing practices.
No, I doubt that. So this
inside joke for those of you who haven't listened long enough. Steven, another of our friends, was on an Air Baltic flight that did not de-ice when it probably should have. Anyway.
Yes. I will not say anything further. But okay, so they're flying to basically Amsterdam and Paris, and then people are. I guess the assumption is they're going to fly onward to Riga.
Yeah, well, I would have assumed that those two airports would have been like you could get an Air France or KLM connection, but apparently not.
I mean, I know that those airlines fly
This is also
there.
one of those things, like, historically all these things existed. Who the hell knows what really exists now?
Yeah.
It's also possible that Air Baltic has a lot more frequency.
Yeah.
That's yeah. But, I mean, again, like, are you going to connect through Riga? Like, that seems, to these other points, like, that seems kind of out of the way. Riga's pretty far north. Like, it's, I don't know. It seems like an odd way to get to Europe.
Yeah.
Or out of Europe. I don't know. That's just my sense on it.
If Delta flew to Riga and then had all these onward connections, that would make sense to me.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? But that doesn't seem to be what it is. And so, like, are you going to fly, like I said, are you going to fly Delta to Munich and then connect onward to Tallinn or Riga and then, like, back to Paris and then come home? I mean, I guess at the end of the day, like, it kind of doesn't matter, right? If it's decent marketing and it gives them some options to sell, and the one time someone needs it, like, the cost to implement it might not be that bad. I can't imagine they're going to be a huge feed partner.
Yeah.
And maybe it's about, there was one of the interesting things about it is the entire code share partnership like contract was actually in the DOT filing. They redacted, all the numbers, but a lot of the details were in there. And there's like, Delta has a cap on how many seats in the total Air Baltic network it is allowed to sell in any period of time, but it's not capped per flight or it's like per month is capped, but not per flight or per day. It's some weird thing like that. Like, there's clearly some hopes that, like, I don't know, maybe there's a cruise leaving that they need to get a bunch of people to and they code share through because it made more sense that way. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah. It was a weird one to me. I will say that the Delta's corporate communications department did tell me that they will look into options for elite reciprocity when it gets approved. So, I was trying to check if those still existed, if KLM or Air France had those flights anymore. Yeah, they currently don't, so that may be part of it.
So Emirates is getting rid of Fort Lauderdale service and replacing it with Miami.
It's been gone. Yeah, Fort Lauderdale's been gone. I mean, they shut that down with the pandemic. But yeah, instead of restoring Fort Lauderdale, it looks like they're going to restore. They have announced 4 times a week service to Miami instead. Or that's what's been announced, and Fort Lauderdale's nowhere to be seen. So we are assuming it's the replacement.
I always wondered why they chose to go to Fort Lauderdale over Miami.
Good onward connections with JetBlue. Cargo would be
cruises,
and cruise. There's a decent cruise port in Fort Lauderdale also.
No, that's what I mean. Why they picked Fort Lauderdale over Miami.
So I think the cruise situation, though, there's a port in Miami, so that's sort of 50-50. I honestly think that onward connection into the Caribbean on JetBlue was a big part of it, and that goes away now. And it was interesting to read the release, and they talk about access to all the the rest of the world and whatnot, and all the onward connections that Miami facilitates. And it's like, yeah, most of those aren't American, and there's like. That doesn't seem like a likely sell-through to me. I don't know.
Interesting.
Those are not going to be friendly codeshare partners anytime soon.
No.
So, Americans finally come to terms with having Qatar Airways in One World and having Akbar be the chair of the One World Alliance this year. So
Well, and to be clear too, right? Like this also comes on the heels of Emirates pulling their Alaska partnership at the end of July, right? They announced that.
Yeah, well, I mean, the partnership is ending. Which way it ended is
Yeah, I mean, I think
probably a little bit of both.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm not trying to suggest
Yeah.
one way or the other, but what I'm saying is this is also like part of that, right? Like Emirates isn't partners with American. They were partners with Alaska, and there's a bunch of stuff going on right behind the scenes, which is also funny to me because JetBlue and American are so cozy now.
But only in the Northeast.
Yeah, it's
just New York and Boston.
So now not only do you need to know, what partnerships are, but you need to know in what part of the country those partnerships exist.
Just like in Seattle and Los Angeles, American and Alaska have a tighter partnership than just their one world relationship.
Yes. So.
Yeah, the industry's gotten pretty complicated in a hurry, and none of it's where it used. Nothing's where it used to be.
Yeah,
you can't find anything anymore.
Exactly. Seth, you mentioned the UK green list mess. We talked about it a little bit before on a previous show, but I think it's gotten a little more complicated.
Well,
and France is now changing.
Yeah, it's just there's a weird difference between the two that I think was interesting, but just the whole is Europe reopening, and we've talked about that a lot in different ways. France has decided that Americans or anyone vaccinated from within the EU is actually allowed to visit with no test, no quarantine requirements. If you're coming from the US, you can visit with a test, even if vaccinated, and a negative test, no quarantine requirements. But at the same time, the UK was sort of trying to get its travel industry back on track and had this we're going to use the science approach of which countries are safe and which aren't. And literally British Airways already had the marketing email queued up to go on your visit to Portugal. We've got great fares. And that email came out about an hour after the British government said that Portugal had switched from green to amber and was no longer, if you went, you had to quarantine on the way home.
Oops.
But they gave everybody 4 days notice. So British Airways and EasyJet threw a bunch of extra flights and capacity, upgauged everything they could. British Airways threw a 777 to Faro, which is the southern port, or the southern coastal city in Portugal. 777 back up to London for the last flight out. So, I have visions of people fighting at the gate to get on board kind of thing.
Yeah.
Take my baby. Not quite that bad.
Get us out of here.
Yeah. You just have to quarantine when you get back. It's not that bad. The UK government's approach to this has been pretty slapdash from the beginning, and this did not inspire much confidence. Especially when there was the people who did the testing for TUI vacations. There's a UK branch of the TUI Fly, Armada, and they do all the vacations, whatever. There's a tweet from one of them somewhere saying, we've been testing. We tested 12,000 people in the past month. The number of positives can be counted on two hands. These aren't you're more likely to catch it traveling across the country to a pub in a different town than you are going to Portugal. So it's just been a mess. And to contrast that with sort of how it looks everywhere else is really interesting.
I mean, this is similar to a discussion I had with a mutual friend of ours. Just what is keeping us from wanting to book international travel is not the virus at this point. It's these complicated rules, right? I'm vaccinated. I feel fairly safe. I know there's a risk. That risk is less. But I don't want to get stuck somewhere because the rules change while I'm there.
I think right now the likelihood of the U.S. changing its rules to make it harder to come home would be very low. The risk you have is booking too far out and finding yourself where you thought you could just go somewhere, no longer being able to just go somewhere. And instead of vaccinated plus test is acceptable, now it's quarantine when you get here.
Yeah.
And I don't know that that'll ever really happen, but obviously the UK, don't go there. I'm starting to wonder about JetBlue's inaugural to London in mid-August.
Yeah, I mean it's not far off.
So. I got to see it. It's 8 weeks away.
Yeah.
Am I going to have to convince someone that I'm working while I'm there to skip the quarantine? I don't know.
What about the Phuket to Europe nonstops on Thai?
Apparently that Thailand's ready to reopen, 6 destinations from Phuket.
And that's because they put Phuket in a sort of bubble, right? So they focused on
recovering that part of the economy.
Recovering that part mostly. And
we have a colleague who was there who said the rules were loosely enforced, sporadically enforced, strangely enforced.
Yes. Yeah. So,
but my favorite part of it actually was that the people doing the enforcement had to take a selfie in front of every shop that they checked to prove that they were really there.
Oh man. So a bunch of these airlines, well, Thai in particular, is starting nonstop service to a bunch of European cities to Phuket nonstop.
Yeah, listen, if they're not allowed to connect through Bangkok, why not move your hub over and Try to make some money.
So Phuket's not a huge airport, though, right? Like, it's like one runway.
Yeah, but it handles 747s all the time.
Yeah. I mean, I can handle this, but like as far as traffic, these flights all arrive, I'm guessing, near the same time. That'll be fun to go through immigration in Phuket.
You used to handle 674s all the time. That's a lot of people. I don't know.
But okay, now you got to handle 3 of them at the same time.
No, that's fair. I guess what I would say is they could throw all their immigration officers out there because ain't no one goes to Bangkok.
That's true. What were you going to say, Foz?
Yeah. Well, as long as they have the facilities.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's probably not too different than something like Bali, right? Small one runway airport, but if you get a bunch of flights coming at the same time, you're gonna wait.
Yeah.
I do wonder how much also they can do with this sort of the pre-clearance of digital, vaccine passports and whatever, and like submitting all your paperwork in advance. Love or hate it from a privacy standpoint, that's definitely has become and will continue to grow as part of the travel experience. And I don't see that scaling back much when this all goes away. And so the digital stuff, I think, is going to be a big deal. And that helps speed things up. And we actually have a topic about that with iOS 15 also. But
oh yeah, I mean, I'm looking online. I'm looking at a map. There's 744. There's a few 777s, 3 or 4 777s, and then some like A320. So the terminal is actually decent sized. So maybe they can handle it. And
whatever.
now
all they want to use your tourist dollars. They don't care about the rest of the experience.
I mean, I might have to look at United. I mean, that could be a destination for me. You don't need testing when you transit Germany, so might do that.
Or Amsterdam.
So there you go.
You need to cancel something exotic.
That's how I shut up. I might go. You never know.
I actually think we do know.
Yeah, I think we have a pretty good idea on this.
Oh man. Anyway, so let's talk about that, Seth. The Apple iOS ID stuff and the wallet and what Apple talked about today during their WWDC conference.
I mean, I think it's interesting. They're basically saying that for states that permit a digital replica of the ID, they're going to allow users to scan their ID. They'll validate it somehow, and presumably the state will provide some function there, because otherwise seems like it'd be very easy to fake to me. And then encrypt it like a credit card, and when you get to a TSA checkpoint, and they sort of showed it, but also acknowledged that this is something they're working with the TSA to get to be something that will be acceptable. It's not a done deal yet. You'll be prompted for like all your credentials and hit the go button, and instead of the approved transaction will be to transmit that data to the TSA sort of doc check computer, which will then run it against whatever it's being done. Which is these days if you've flown lately and seen the ones where you just check your ID instead of your boarding pass, they basically validate your name, date of birth, and sex, and maybe 1 or 2 other things it's probably just those 3 things, against flight manifests. And if you are on a flight manifest for departure from that airport within the next X number of hours, it automatically clears you. I actually had one recently. I think it might be a 4-hour cutoff, because I was at the airport early the other day because of transit time issues, and the guy actually ended up needing to see my boarding pass at Logan when they never have before. But it's a really it's cool technology. Instead, it limits one of the ways people could limited the ability to forge a boarding pass or to get through without actually having a ticket. This is another way that sort of does that without needing to produce any physical. Well, I can't say physical. You have to have your phone, but it's an NFC tap, and you're done.
So,
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, so the question is, like, what, like for me, when I go through the airport, I typically carry my passport, and I just scan that passport on this new system, right?
Mm-hmm.
Would this be able to carry my passport in the same way?
Only if the U.S. government said that had approved a digital version of it. So I would assume that for now the answer is no.
Gotcha.
Right, because even as it is, not every state allows this sort of thing. And I haven't seen a list of which ones do. So this could be like a thing where it only works in Idaho, and they're making a big deal out of it for a very relatively small number of people. I don't know.
Yeah, interesting.
Even smaller, it could go to New Hampshire.
I like the idea of it, right? Like it's a neat idea. Just practical wise.
I'm happy that they're doing it via NFC rather than barcode. The TSA has a somewhat checkered past in terms of barcodes and digital signing and getting that data right. I'd like to assume that they would require a digital signature either way. At this point, after the whole print at home, fake pre-check, and no one could check it, no one could prove it debacle from 2012. But
yeah,
who the hell knows?
Oh man, that's an interesting one. We actually had a question from a listener. Let me see here. Let me pull it up. I'll pull up the question that was asked.
Yeah, it was basically, there was a story the other day about,
This is from Ben.
a story the other day about how effectively travel rewards earned through credit cards are subsidized by the poor people. Because they pay interest because they're carrying a balance. They pay higher annual fees relative to other things, and it's just they don't get the value out of the cards. They don't get the figure out how to use the points as well. I think it's the gist of it, right?
Yeah,
it's not a new story. It's like the concept has been around for some time. So
I don't know that I think it's a little more nuanced than that, right?
Okay.
To discuss this, I'm not saying what you just said is more nuanced. What I'm saying is I think the argument is more nuanced to prove the point. I don't think that the poor people in the United States, because this is a U.S. issue, are stacking Chase Sapphire reserves in their wallet. Business and personal.
But they're using whatever free Chase card there is or whatnot, because it's the one they can get. They get whatever credit they can, and then typically are more likely to have carried a balance, are more likely to have paid a late fee, are more likely to have spent more money on it, and Chase is earning the same couple percent off of them and using that to help subsidize per transaction, using that to help subsidize all the payouts of everything else at the high end, I think is the argument.
But I would argue that most of those people have generally small credit lines, so even with carrying a balance and paying interest on it, it's not really a lot of money.
But I think
16% it adds up quick.
Yeah. I think it's when you stack it, when it's hundreds of thousands of people doing it.
But on the backside of this, right? What you have to remember is on a premium card, the interchange rate is higher than on a basic card. So the banks are making active money on the CSR transactions more than they would on a, say, Freedom card. And that can go up to 1%.
And I think too, Foz, one of the comments made in this article was, the businesses are charging higher fees for using a card. And I actually think the opposite has happened during COVID, right? Like people have been hesitant to use cash because of touch and everything, and have switched to using cards. And because of that, a lot of these places to encourage people to pay digitally or not use cash have either gotten rid of fees or lowered the fees on their customers, not necessarily from between the credit card and the business, but to the customer. So I don't know that part of the argument stands up anymore. I think it's very much a stretch to say. I mean, I'm looking at the data here, and it's like, they're using some papers from 2010 to talk about wealth transfers on paying cash versus using credit cards in households and things. I'm not sure that data holds up 11 years later, and especially as the credit card market has changed. Do I think there are issues? Yes. But I think in general, I kind of disagree with the overall article a little bit. I don't know. That's just my 2 cents. No pun.
2%? 2.8%?
Yeah, 2%.
No, the higher discount rate is definitely a thing, Boz, but I think overall that's not the consumer per se doesn't pay that, right? The business eats that cost. And I know it all comes back to the consumer in the end in some way, shape, or form, but
right, but the banks are getting more money for the transactions that are being run through.
Yeah.
On the CSRs and the other premium cards, so they are actually subsidizing their own use. Right. Yeah. Your average merchant is going to generally charge you the highest fee that they're going to incur. So if it's 3%, they're going to charge you 3%. Even if you do a debit card, and run as a debit transaction where it's not even a percentage, generally a flat fee.
Yeah, and to our listeners' point, I think one of the questions too was should there be reforms similar to Europe, and should the cards be regulated the way they are in Europe? And the quick gut reaction is no, don't do that. But I think it would just depend, right? I think there's a little more protection in Europe for the consumer.
The regulation there is, in a lot of ways, it's also about the discount rate. If that happened, the points loyalty world would collapse in a lot of ways, right? I mean, if the credit card company can't earn 2.8% or 3% or whatever it is on every transaction, they're not going to give you 2 cents worth of points.
Yeah.
And that's the main reason the credit card ecosystem is so much bigger in the U.S. for loyalty programs, and points is so much bigger in the U.S. than elsewhere in the world. And it's a many, many billions of dollars question.
Well, and I don't think airlines or hotels or any of those companies would let that happen, because that's a large revenue stream for them.
They have very good lobbying power. Should it is a different question, but I don't think it could, even if they wanted it to.
Yeah. I don't know. It's a good question from our listener, and just about what we think. I think I need to spend more time kind of digesting the data. I just haven't had a chance. It's Monday, so. But I think that's a show. We got some after show topics, some bonus topics for our Patreon subscribers, including a bunch of trip report stuff. I guess, Seth, do you want to talk about the Breeze inaugural just real quick, and then we can talk about the rest later?
Sure. I was on the Breeze inaugural, happily as a guest of the airline, so they did pay for my ticket. I paid to get to and from, but it was an interesting experience. It's, first flight of a new airline and something that had been worked on for a long time. I think my takeaway is, if you can get a cheap seat on a nonstop flight for, the cities you're connecting through, why wouldn't you? At the same time, even with how long they've spent sort of getting everything going and getting ready to operate this network, and it being a month later probably than they wanted it to be because of some delays at the FAA, the planes aren't in the configuration that they're really supposed to be. Like they're straight from what's it called, Azul E195. I think it might be my first E195 flight. I gotta check, but it it had the old seats still installed with like stitches missing and some stains on them. It was clean enough, like it wasn't filthy, but you could tell it was not a new plane. And like seats, I'm actually willing to forgive them a little bit because they're waiting to, seat manufacturing lead times are surprisingly long for airplane related stuff. So later this year, they're going to have different seats on board. October, November timeframe, they're going to start replacing the seats. Then they're going to have streaming IFE on board, so right, like connect to the local Wi-Fi network on the plane and watch movies or TV shows or something. The companies that make those systems advertise how quickly they can be deployed, and it's like 2 to 3 days you can be done with your whole fleet. And these guys aren't going to have it till midsummer for some reason, and I can't figure that one out. The app sort of mostly works, but like definitely can't handle, nothing they do really handles multi-city well because they're really about one-way and round-trip flights. So I'll give them a pass on my weird multi-city because I flew Tampa to Charleston and then, an hour later on the same plane, Charleston to Hartford, Bradley, Connecticut. That's an unusual experience and so fine. It wasn't really supposed to support that, but like, I don't know, some of the other bits about it, like, it does some things well, but not everything. It's just, there's a lot of weird little things that aren't what it's finally going to be. And so like buy on board is coming, but they didn't have that ready yet. So everybody gets a free bag of chips now, but eventually it's going to only be if you buy the bundle seat with the nicest are their bundles. And so nicest is going to be the first class seats on the A220s when those start getting delivered in October. And that's a 2-2 arrangement against, 2-3 in the back. But nicer is extra legroom on the 195, and nice is just a regular seat. And nicer also includes, your carry-on bag and a check bag and the snack on board and those things. But like the whole experience now is everybody was getting the snacks because they haven't figured out, they don't have the like systems in place yet to do the buy on board. And again, like I get it, all that stuff takes time to build out and be ready to implement. And all things considered, especially with, they got FAA approval on a Friday and launched flights on the following Thursday.
Yeah,
that's absurd. That's ridiculously fast. And they deserve a lot of credit for that. But they also had been planning to do it all along, and this was basically like waiting to flip a switch. And I feel like a little bit like there should have been more stuff actually ready to go when that switch flipped.
Yeah.
They'll get there. Probably. Dave Nealman's got historically has had a magic touch with airlines. He declined to wear his mask on board for most of the second flight, so that was awesome. And when he was wearing it, it was one of those mesh ones that you could like see daylight through.
So why wear it at all?
Well, because the FAA says you have to, or I guess CDC says you have to on behalf of or whatever. Anyway, so it was just, there was some weird stuff like that. And his history related to COVID on the internet has not been a particularly impressive one, in my opinion. He's had some interesting tweets.
Yes. Fascinating. Well, I'm glad it was a good trip.
Yeah, overall. But the trip was fine. It was nice. Crazy route network.
Yeah. Random stuff.
San Antonio to Tulsa, Oklahoma City, and Bentonville, I think.
Yeah, weird. Just weird.
Tampa to Tulsa? I don't know. There's maybe something. I will give them credit. I think a lot of this is throw it at the wall and see what sticks, right? This is a new dartboard, and they're willing to pivot and move quickly. They might make it work. The question is, can enough of them work?
Yeah, understood. Interesting. Well, to our listeners, thanks for listening. Stick around if you want to hear about some more inaugural trip report-ish, not inaugurals, but more trip report-ish type stuff. A crazy cruise and Portland hotel availability, and not Oregon is what we're talking about. So thanks to our Patreon subscribers. Thanks to our listeners. You can find us on Twitter at @dotslines, moredotsmorelines.com. Yeah, and until next time, happy travels.
Take care.
See you later.